Hi everyone, it's your host Mevish and you're listening to this week's episode of Hand the Mic Over. This is the finale of our two-part series on Iraq, so if you haven't already, be sure to check out the first episode available on Spotify and YouTube at Hand the Mic Over. This week's episode features detailed recounts of the war-ridden conditions of Iraq. This content may be triggering for listeners. As always, be sure to check out our Instagram account at Hand the Mic Over for pictures from today's episode. Alright, well, we're on the last question of the podcast, and it's basically if someone wants to connect more with Iraqi culture or just better understand what it's like being from Iraq or growing up here as an Iraqi-Canadian, what's the way that they can connect or learn more about your culture?
I would say it's very important to first just maybe be an Iraqi person because that could tell you a lot. But even me, I go back to the history. Me telling you my story is just like such a small percentage. A lot of Iraqi people are not even Arab, and no one knows about that. There are Armenian Iraqis, there's Kurdish Iraqis, there are Assyrian Iraqis who are the indigenous people to the land. Iraq goes back like thousands and thousands of years. It's an ancient civilization. So if you just do some research and learn about all those groups within one country, you'll be mind blown. A lot of people, again, think of it as just like a war-ridden country, but they don't realize that a lot of inventions came from Iraq. We invented math. We invented the wheel.
That is fascinating. Wait, what? We need to get more into this. This is not the end of the podcast.
Yeah, like I'm telling you, it's an ancient civilization, like the people of Babylon, that whole area of like the Mesopotamia. So Iraqi people are considered one of the only people who are actually ethnically Arab because they came from Yemenis or like Saudi Arabians, and those are the original Arabs. Those tribes were the only ones who are considered Arab and who spoke Arabic, and then they just moved down, trickled all the way down, based on resources and things like that, looking for water. That's how they ended up in Iraq or like the Gulf. We're more ethnically Arab than a Lebanese person would be.
So you mentioned that the native people of Iraq were Assyrians.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know anything about what their culture is like, or if it's like different from an Iraqi Arab person's culture?
So they have their own language. They are usually Catholic, and because of the political sort of situation, they usually don't end up classifying themselves as Iraqi. They would just call themselves like Assyrian or Chaldean. I obviously respect them as the indigenous people to the land, but there's a lot of history there, a lot of crossing boundaries between Arabs and Assyrians.
So what would you say is the majority community of Iraq?
I would say 80% Arab. And then the rest would be Assyrian, Chaldean, Kurdish, Armenian. So those minority groups you would find more near the border. So like the Kurdish people like live in the north.
Do you know, like, I know we're like getting into the history and it's okay if you don't know, but generally around when the Arab population sort of took over Iraq?
I don't know exactly when, but I could tell you that Saddam Hussein is the one who gave them all that power. That was sort of, I feel like, peak.
The reason I'm getting into it is because it sounds so similar to Canada and what we're talking about right now with truth and reconciliation.
Exactly. Only thing is, I don't think Iraq is at that level of reconciliation. And I don't know when they will sort of reach that. I only found out about this from my own research and from my own curiosity. And when I asked my father, he acknowledges that they are indigenous to the land, but obviously like he also left a long time ago. So I don't know what people who live there day to day think.
Mm-hmm. So like when you're living here and you hear about truth and reconciliation and how the First Nations people were settled here, when you like first learned about it or in general, did you feel like you were listening to the story of Iraq?
Yeah, that's sort of how I found out about it. I think first year of university, I was taking an Indigenous Studies course and they wanted us to relate it to our own culture. And I started researching all the groups in Iraq, and that's when I kept seeing the word indigenous, they're indigenous. And I was like, wait a minute, like what's the history here? And that's what I ended up writing about, is how my country is basically in a similar situation, but they're not at the same level of trying to make peace, I guess.
There's a lot of feedback that I've been hearing about Canada's attempt at reconciliation and how it's not really productive. Would you
100%.
agree with that or no?
Yeah, I could talk about this for days. I feel like I've written so many essays about this, taken so many courses on this. Yeah, just a lot of talk and no actual action. Even like the actual TRC report they released was problematic.
What specifically?
There's like a lot of things and like clauses within it that they had to keep amending and like re-releasing and things like that. Just if you go back to like the Indian Act alone and read on it, see how many changes they had to make just because of being forced to, essentially, at the end of it, you would be mind blown.
Being well educated on this topic, what would you say would be a more productive step in the direction of reconciliation?
I really just think they need to stop making the decisions themselves in terms of reconciliation. Give the actual people that you want to reconcile with the power to decide what they want. Acknowledge their sovereignty, give back what you took, stop stealing their water, things like that. I feel like are important. Even just involving them more in politics. Like, why can't we see like more indigenous people sitting in the cabinet? I feel like these small things where they are placed in places of power, that's when the change will come.
Would you say the same for Iraq then? Could they like adopt that step as well? Or do you think it would have to be done differently over there?
It's sad to say, but I just don't think they are there politically at all. I think this would take them like another 50 years, to be honest with you. Like, I'm Iraqi and I acknowledge this just from learning about the indigenous situation here. And they don't have like these schools of thought or like these sort of methods of studying. So I don't think they would ever grasp the idea of reconciliation, not for a long time. Not unless like I maybe move back there and try to push it for them.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, we were mentioning earlier how the Western social media and Western ideologies in general are being more popularized over there. So maybe, like, somewhere down the line, this will catch on.
I mean, I hope, but again, I feel like the Western stuff is happening in terms of their food. It might reach to a way of how they dress, how they speak, or anything like that. But the government, that's going to be very hard to touch. They're so used to a way of sort of running things. And that's why, honestly, they don't prosper because they don't acknowledge the democracy and things like that.
Yeah, no. I mean, we also know that there's definitely some Western control at play too. A lot of very messy, dirty politics that are going on, not just here, but really everywhere in the world.
100%. And I think another big thing for their politics is that it comes a lot from religion, whereas here we sort of don't see that anymore. Like, the church doesn't have all this influence as it did when Canada first started, but they still hold that like very close. And depending on if the person in power is Muslim or not, or what sort of sector of Islam they belong to, things can change overnight.
Absolutely. Yeah, like it makes it hard for people who then aren't following those beliefs because they're also from Iraq or, you know, any country where this government pattern happens. But then I feel like you're not really able to stand up against them. They're just so
Not at
rooted
all, yeah.
in whatever they're doing that it just becomes really, really hard to start any sort of change.
Exactly, yeah. I don't think activism is big in Iraq at all. And if it is, it almost always ends up turning into violence.
It's unfortunate. Like you said, educating yourself is definitely the first step to being able to bring some positive change.
100%. Just don't know when their schools would ever adopt things like that.
Well, on the brighter side, you mentioned that there were a lot of inventions that came from Iraq that are used here. Like you said, math and the wheel.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard about algebra being like a
Yeah.
Arab word.
I think it is actually algebra. They invented the wheel, they invented writing, they invented law,
Oh.
they invented astronomy, maps, and the 60-minute hour. So essentially like time. All those came from like the ancient civilizations of Iraq. Before it was actually even called that.
Isn't it so crazy that all these things that we depend on now were created over there, but now somehow their government or their country is backwards and ours is forwards?
Exactly. That's the thing that my parents always talk to me about. And they're like, you know, when I was growing up and it was like 1980, Iraq had escalators on the street and it would take you to this bridge and you would cross over to the other side.
What?
Like, yeah, like escalators were there before it was ever like made here and things like that. And then it just started going downhill. And again, it's all thanks to politics and then wars and things like that. And we would move backwards and all of a sudden you see all this garbage on the streets. But if you just search up how Iraq used to look in the 1900s, you would see how modernized and how free they were. They had like this big chance to prosper.
Foreign involvement is the number one reason why the Middle East is not prospering right now.
100%. Yeah.
It's so sad because people like your parents and even other people who were growing up there at that time, their childhood, their young adult life that we're in now was so hopeful. I can't even imagine what it would be like to then watch your country get torn down like that and be forced to leave.
That's how it is. Yeah, I feel like even I experienced that, even though I was only like 3 or 4. Like, I remember like American soldiers like roaming the streets, and to me, they were scary. It was like this foreign creature that I've never seen before, the way they dressed, and they would wear like these reflective sunglasses and you can't see their eyes. And there were always like these big, like white men that are muscular and like blonde, and we don't have men like that back home. And to me, that's what scared me. But if you come here, Arab people are like the barbaric, scary ones. Like, I have memories of them invading my neighbor's house looking for someone. You know, they're always thinking someone's a terrorist or something. And they knocked the wall in my bedroom, like the bricks down. And then all I see is this American soldier like staring at me, and he just knocked down the walls to my house. Or they would come and like enter our house with no permission and search everything. I don't know what they're looking for. And I remember one time they sat down in our living room and were asking like my father a bunch of questions. And then they left, and I never sat down on that same couch again because I was like, that scary person was sitting there. And I just felt like it was just this like gross, like forbidden place that I did not want to exist anymore.
Oh my god. Oh my god. That must have been so much to deal with as a child.
Yeah, like those are my core memories from like being a toddler, is like remembering those soldiers.
And it's so ironic how, like you mentioned, they flip the story then when you come over here.
Exactly, yeah. I don't know. It's just difficult, and I feel like no one would ever grasp the idea unless you hear someone's like personal experience of actually living there, or you go and see for yourself.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned there are vloggers who are posting YouTube videos of the beauty of Iraq, and like, it's definitely a beautiful country. But I don't know if I've seen a lot of people who are putting out this story, what you're describing of like so many people's lives out there.
Yeah, actually, I don't think I've ever seen someone give like the traumatic side of growing up there, like what you would experience there. But I guess maybe it's just because those people only started going back recently and seeing it as like a travel destination for like, leisure purposes.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being brave enough to share this side of the story because I don't think we've ever talked about this. And I don't think I've talked about this with anyone of memories of the war and invasion and how traumatic it really was for so many generations living back home. It's really important that you keep speaking about your side of the story because the opposite narrative dominates the media here. That's all we see. I
I
don't
agree
think
with you, yeah.
people
And
know. I really don't think people
no,
know.
definitely not.
I mean, the description you gave of that soldier, for example, that's like the beauty standard over here. Like, they try to, spread that all over the world. I know, like, even for Pakistan, being like white is considered the most beautiful thing ever. And of course, with pretty privilege come a lot of other privileges. I mean, you're considered more trustworthy, you're considered a better person, but they don't show this side of how that's just a person and those people can also do like such horrible things.
Yeah, to me, that was just like, put me now in a room with like this big white man that I described, or like an Arab man who's wearing cultural clothes and a beard, and I would choose the Arab man who I'd feel safer with. Because that's what I remember in my childhood as being scary. Like, if I saw them in the neighborhood, I would go run back home. They would come and then just collect all the men on the neighborhood, like line them up on the street, and then just arrest all of them for no reason.
If you're comfortable speaking about this, I was just wondering, did you know anyone who was taken away?
Yeah, they took my dad one time for a day, and then they released him because obviously he was just a regular man. That was one of the times where they took everyone on the street. And I remember it was Ramadan and he was fasting, and he had to day fasting because they would not even give them food or water, and they kept them blindfolded, and they would just ask them all these questions about like political things that are going on, or looking for this person. Do you know him? Do you know that? Imagine you're just dying of thirst and you're hungry and you have no idea idea what these people are accusing you of, and you're just blindfolded. They would like take off their clothes and torture them and things like that. And so they didn't find anything with my dad, obviously. So they took him back on the car. I don't know. He says I didn't see anything the whole time he was blindfolded. They pushed him off the truck and they're like, start running or we're gonna shoot you. They took off the blindfold and then my dad just started running. And they're like, go back to where you came from. Don't look back. Don't see our faces. Like the gun is out. The rifle was just like pressed against his back. That's besides like my aunt's husband who they took and accused of things, and my grandfather who they put in jail for just years with no reason, and they would not let them out.
That is so horrible. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Again, never heard this side of the story here in my whole life.
And that's the thing that I guess since things are a little bit better now in Iraq that no one talks about, but the American influence is still very much there. Like the last time I went in that 2016, 2017 period, the city of Mosul was like occupied and it was like influence from America and ISIS and all these different like political groups and things like that. And they were not allowed to leave. So they were just locked in their houses and they would just bombard them day and night. Till now, if you go back to look at that city, it's in ruins. Everything to the ground, everyone buried under the rubble, basically everything that's happening in Palestine right now. And that never made headline news. And I did have my aunts and her daughters who passed away because they were living there. And after the situation started, they did not let them leave anymore. So they would just be able to call us once in a while if there's ever electricity. And then we just stop hearing from them. And till this day, my dad is in denial that she actually passed away. And my cousins go out and look for them all the time. But we never found their bodies. We just know that their house was bombarded and it was just rubble on the ground. And that was the aunt who they had her husband for years, and they finally released him so he could finally be with his daughters. He got them married. One of them just had a child, and they were just all in the house together. And all of a sudden, they're on lockdown, and you can't leave, and day and night you can't sleep. There's no electricity, and all you hear is this airplane above you, and you don't know in any second if it's gonna drop the bomb on your house or on the house next to you. And at least they were together.
I can't imagine what you went through, what your family is going through and has gone through, but being here and sharing your side of the story, honestly, is like, I think it's so important that people hear and learn about the reality of this whole American dream and like, oh, Middle East is evil, and really hear with their own ears and realize the lies that they've been fed their whole lives.
Exactly. I appreciate you for giving me the space to sort of be able to just let a few people at least hear about it. That's how it is. The reality is, yes, Iraq is safe right now, but just a couple years ago, there was a whole city in occupation and America had a big hand in it. And it was innocent people just locked in their house and locked in this town that they can't leave. And you can't convince me that all of these people were terrorists.
Yeah, for sure. The war's not over.
Definitely not. I mean, as long as we have that oil, America's gonna come after us. And even now, with the Palestine situation, Iran is bombing other countries, and that all goes over Iraq into other countries. So they had the airport closed for a while, like all the airways. So even if it's safe in Iraq, there's always neighboring things going on in the Middle East where we get directly affected by.
It was so advanced, and then within like 10-20 years things flipped so fast.
Exactly. It was just as soon as I feel like 2001 hit, the 9/11 situation, Saddam Hussein being in power, that was like that time era that changed everything there politically, and they haven't been able to go back since, like, fully.
Do you think that in the future there's a chance for Iraq to be able to recover and go back to how it was before the war?
100%. Of course, I believe in that, and I would want nothing more than that for like my family and my people. And I would actually love to just be able to move back home, but it's just gonna take a lot of work on their politics and the way they approach things and who they give power to.
And you mentioned that you would be down to go back home. Do you feel like Canada is your home?
You know what? I did for a while. I feel like maybe ever since I was a child till like that teenage phase. But in recent years, ever since like I hit my late teens, early 20s, I don't see it that way anymore. I don't know.
Would you say that the change in like the political scene here and like in the West in general played a role in that? Or was it like your own personal growth?
I think a little bit of both. Like, obviously, the politics and the economy and everything has changed so much ever since COVID, even. But I think it's just because I actually grew up and I started to see things in a different way. The way I started to get closer to my religion, my culture, I would want to exist in an environment where I can be around people who are like me, who practice the same religion, who have the same culture, who speak the same language. Just feel like I would have more room to grow there.
And you're saying this despite having an Iraqi community in Canada.
Yeah, I don't think I could still call it home, even if there's like a few other Iraqis around me. Just being educated and basing my opinions on like my own culture or my own religion is what has sort of brought this new view.
For me, I never grew up outside of Canada, so this is all I've ever known. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's a really common thing that a lot of people are discussing now where they want to go back home and settle over there instead of here.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that a lot on social media too. And again, I think we're just growing up and I think we're starting to realize that all these narratives of like, you want to be white, this is like freedom, this is safe here, is not the actual storyline.
Definitely not. For me personally, and I don't know if you can relate to this, because of this like extreme idolization of the West, just like South Asia in general, I want to build my culture and my society here to be more accepting and to make like a space for my values. But I mean, I don't know if I'm being naive and how possible that is, really.
No, I think that's possible, 100%. I mean, there's so many like diasporas within Toronto itself and just like the GTA. Again, they base their whole identity on like being multicultural. I think Canada's an accepting place to a certain level where you could succeed. But if you're telling me I want to go to like do this in a random town in like Virginia in the US, I'm gonna be like, I don't think so.
Yeah. You know what it is? I think us being immigrants and children of immigrants and having lived in so many different cultural identities, I don't know if we really have a solid home. We're trying to find it or make it as best as we can, but I don't know if it honestly exists.
I agree with that. A lot of the times, I do want to go back home. I do want to live there, but at the same time, I'm just used to doing things here where back home it would be just a little bit more difficult for me. Again, at the end of the day, they're going to see me as a foreigner. Like, of course, I know the traditions and I know the culture and the religion and everything like that, but to a certain extent, I'm just used to a little bit more freedom. Again, my mindset is shaped by the schools here, by the media here. So it would be hard maybe for them to understand me. I don't know. Like how I think of it is when I go back home to Iraq, the first thing I noticed that I missed obviously is my family. The smell of the air is different. When it rains, it smells different. Those are the things to me that like make Iraq home. When I come back here, the only thing I missed is I missed my friends, but like maybe I miss having iced coffee from Tim Hortons. But besides that, I don't ever miss anything about Canada as much as I have like these strong connections when I go back to Iraq, even though I've only spent 4 years of my life there.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. Because when I went to Pakistan, it was in 2016, and I just went for a few weeks. And I remember towards the end, I was like, yeah, I could like stay here. Yeah, I could make whatever adjustments I need and settle here. It was just so different to be surrounded by people like me who grew up with my morals and then to just have family, like that much family. I have some family here, but nowhere near as much as I do over there. I think that connection to like the land and the people there was so impactful.
Exactly. That's always what I feel too. It's like so much more different because I have like 40 cousins that I can have a sleepover with. And here I have like no one but my sister. That's what makes it home for me.
We're still young, right? And we're figuring these things out. Our parents were around our age or like just a bit older, and they made the decision to leave and whatever like their situations were. It's just so crazy for me to think that me and you and like just other people who are young adults now are at that stage, and I couldn't imagine doing it. Even though it sounds nice, I don't know if I realistically could do it.
I think so too. It's just times have changed. I feel like they used to just be more brave. I mean, they sold them a dream, right? right, and that's what they followed.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like back then doors seemed like they're much more open. But now we have like so many other worries to think about. Like if it's not politics, which is what they were probably running from, it would just be financially, like how am I gonna survive? Everything's so expensive wherever you go, and like what degree do I have? I just feel like we care about different things now, and the only thing they cared about at the time is like safety.
Yeah, it's like superficial life here.
It has come to that, I feel like, yeah, especially in recent years.
Yusur, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this podcast, for opening up and just getting so vulnerable and sharing your story. There were moments where I was just speechless sitting here because I was so drawn to what you were saying. You were spitting facts, you know what I mean?
Thank you so much for having me. I just feel like this was like a therapy session for me to finally just sit down and be able to like talk about my culture. I never do this enough. And I feel like I am knowledgeable and I am in touch with my country and my culture as a whole. And if I just taught you at least one new thing, that's like more than enough for me.
I'm so glad that this platform is fulfilling its purpose, and having these conversations is definitely so therapeutic. I don't see people like us ever getting candid about life here, as a multicultural person in the city especially.
And I've like listened to your other episodes as well, and I always find myself learning about something new. Even if they're from a similar part of the world as me, I find myself thinking of a stereotypical idea I had of that country, and they're saying a completely different story. I'm guilty of like that overgeneralization, and this platform that you're giving to me and to other people just shed like a bit of light is so important.
That means a lot. Before you go, can you teach me how to say bye in the Iraqi dialect of Arabic?
You can say مع السلامة.
One more time.
مع السلامة.
مع السلامة.
Got it.
Okay. مع السلامة, Yusur.
Okay. Thank you. Bye, Mavish.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Hand the Mic Over. Be sure to check out our Instagram account at Hand the Mic Over for pictures from today's episode. As always, you can find us on Spotify and YouTube. And if you're interested in sharing your story, then please don't hesitate to reach out.